Good evening and welcome everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to make sure everyone who's joining today can finish logging onto this call. I think we're ready to go. Welcome to this East West Railway Company online public event for Oxford to Vista. My name is Claire Keith Anderson and I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at East West Railway Company. Following the launch of the second round of non-statutory consultation on the 31st of March, this week we're holding a second round of online events or webinars. The focus of this evening's session is on responding to the questions raised by communities to date. For those wanting more detailed dialogue with specialists from the project team, please attend any of our live chat events. There are 2 or 3 sessions per week, 9 in total between now and the end of the consultation. This evening, we will start with a quick run through of what we are consulting on in your area, but the focus of this evening's event is on responding to questions raised to date by yourselves. We are holding similar sessions across the whole route between Oxford and Cambridge throughout this week, with the last one being held next Monday. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the rest of the team. Joining us today, we also have our Delivery Director for CS2, John Hillman, our Head of Operations, Maria Cliff, our Development Manager, Stephen Barker, our Environment and Sustainability Manager, Tristan Lincoln-Gordon, and our Land and Property Manager, Jern Pace. We also have Tom and Hannah helping us behind the scenes. Before we start with the presentation, I'm going to run through a brief housekeeping and Teams Live note. Many of you might be familiar with Teams Live, but just as a reminder, you'll be on mute throughout. Please note that we're recording these sessions and therefore will not reference any names or descriptions we've been giving because of GDPR reasons. That's all the housekeeping we have. Over to you now, John. Many thanks.
Thanks, Claire, and good evening and welcome to anybody joining us this evening for this webinar. My name's John Hillman. I'm the Connection Stage 2 Delivery Director for East West Rail. We're going to be covering the section between Oxford and Vista this evening, and for those that are interested in the consultation document, that's section A, so that's a place to find the information we're talking about tonight. This webinar is to provide information around the public consultation and to talk about what's included for this section. We're going to provide a quick recap on the proposals, particularly for the benefit of anybody joining us tonight that's not familiar with these proposals or has not been to one of these webinars previously. Then we'll move on to the bulk of the event, and this will focus on specific issues, themes and questions that we've heard or seen since we launched the consultation in March. In the past, we would have spoken with people individually, face-to-face community events, where we could obviously talk to people and answer their questions on a one-to-one basis. This simply isn't possible to answer everyone's question at this webinar. So we wanted to use this time, as I said earlier, to cover some of the biggest emerging issues and themes that we've received feedback on to date. However, we do recognise that lots of people will still have individual specific questions that we may not fully address this evening, or are very specific to themselves and their location. And therefore, we would encourage you to join one of the live events, which are on the screen on the presentation now. And at those live events, we have members from the East West Rail team that can answer or look into your question and provide you with a bit more detail to your specific question. We've already held 6 of these live events and there are 9 more, as I said, with the dates on the screen. They're 2-hour live chat sessions, so there's plenty of opportunity to talk to us. You can access them by visiting the East West Rail website and the virtual consultation room, where you'll find the chat box function on the screen, and that allows you to chat directly with us. If you can't attend the live chat events, you can still email us questions and at contact@eastwestrail.co.uk, and we'll provide an answer to you as soon as we possibly can. So we'll endeavour to cover some key questions tonight that we've received, and hopefully that will help people to understand some of the key concerns. We may, at the end of this session, if time permits, we've got an hour, so dependent on how long the presentation takes, we may have an opportunity for some individual Q&As this evening. So it's still important to us that you place questions or things that you'd like us to look at or answer into the chat bar, and then we can have a look at those, and hopefully, as I said, if time permits, we'll attempt to address some of those this evening with you. But it's also important that you put questions into the chat bar so as we can continue to capture the feedback from yourselves and from communities around what's important or what your questions are. That helps us to shape future consultation responses. It also helps us to shape future events. If we find there are particular themes or areas that people are really interested in, we can tailor our approach accordingly. So it really is important. Okay, so I'm just going to cover what we'll be covering tonight. So we're going to recap what we're consulting on. As I said earlier, we'll have an opportunity to answer those questions which are based around themes and information we've received to date back during the consultation. There'll be a little bit of a section on how to get involved, just to make sure people understand how they can get in contact with us, and then a little bit on what's next. Next slide, please. Okay, so just for clarity, the section shown on the presentation there is the East West Rail route from Oxford in the West Air all the way through to Cambridge. It's the first time that we've consulted on the whole route between Oxford and Cambridge. We did consult on the section between Bedford and Cambridge back in 2019, but this is the whole route that we're talking about as part of this consultation. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Maria Cliff, Head of Operations for East West Rail, who's going to talk to you a bit more about what we're consulting on. Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, John, and good evening, everybody. As John said, my name is Maria Cliff. I am Head of Operations for East West Railway Company. Put simply, the consultation itself is split into two main sections. The first section is focused on customer experience and railway operations, which I'll cover very briefly in a moment. And the second section is our 6 areas of infrastructure development. And tonight we are obviously focused on the Oxford to Vista section of that infrastructure. From a customer experience in railway operations, we're consulting on a wide range of areas, and we actually do have a specific webinar tomorrow afternoon if anybody's interested in learning more about the points in this part of the consultation. But essentially, we've asked a number of questions because we really want to hear your views on how we can shape the customer experience for this railway, from the train service, the number of trains that we operate, where those trains call, through to the station experience, and how you get to the stations from your home and when you've connected to your destination. We're also going to be procuring a long-term fleet of trains, so we've got the opportunity to incorporate people's feedback into what we specify goes into those trains. And also when you interact with our colleagues and where you want that to be at various points along your journey. And finally, customer information and what you need and when. So right the way through from when you plan your journey and buy your tickets to post-journey experience as well. So there are 6 sections of the infrastructure part of the consultation. Tonight we're focused on the left-hand box there, the light blue box between Oxford and Bicester. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague who will take you through some more detail on the Oxford to Bicester section A. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Maria. So I just want to recap on section A, which, as Maria said, is Oxford through to Bicester. Next slide, please. So Oxford to Bicester, the stations and the railway lines between Oxford and Bicester don't currently have the capacity to run the additional 4 trains an hour that East West Rail is going to be operating from the finalised rail timetable that we're going to operate. So the proposed changes provide for ensuring that we provide a reliable service along that route, fast and reliable between Bletchley, Cambridge and stations in between, but equally it's about connectivity between the different locations as well. All of that information is shown, as I said previously, within section A of the consultation document. Next slide, please. So as Maria pointed out, we are going to be talking about some infrastructure improvements along the route. And between Oxford and Bicester, there are a number of locations where we're looking at infrastructure improvements, both to the potential track or the stations or other associated infrastructure. At Oxford Parkway and Vista, we're looking at the stations and we're working out the patronage from the future, and we're trying to understand whether the facilities that exist today are suitable and sufficient to provide the customer experience that we expect to provide for our customers. So that's ongoing work that we'll be building into the next stages of the consultation. At Oxford, it's very constrained station. It's a very constrained site. It's very busy. It's grown tremendously over the last 20 years. And in actual fact, it's really difficult for East West Rail to provide a service into Oxford because of the capacity constraints. Therefore, we're working with Network Rail to identify the proposals and the potential changes that need to happen at Oxford. It could involve things like additional tracks into the station, additional platforms, additional footbridges, things like that. So at the moment we're working with Network Rail, as I said, to work out what the optimum solution is, both for meeting meeting East West Rail requirements for the future, but equally making sure that the requirements that we seek don't impact the rest of the industry. We're also looking at the level crossing at Bicester, and currently with the additional services that we're proposing, the implications for the crossing at Bicester are that it could be closed for up to 50 minutes in every hour. We recognise that is not ideal for connectivity around the area, and we also recognise that actually that causes an awful lot of inconvenience. So over the years, there are various studies being undertaken into that level crossing because it has become a problem over the years. And later on in the presentation, we'll be talking to you about the options that we're looking at the moment around how we're going to develop our option going forward for that level crossing. Next slide, please. So what as I said at the beginning, what we're attempting to do is pick up themes and to pick up questions that people have been asking us since the consultation started in March. And some of my colleagues are now going to go through some more background information, but equally they'll be providing those answers to some common themes to help provide more information and hopefully clarity for people. So I'm going to pass you over to Stephen Barker, Development Manager for East West Rail. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, John. So yeah, we're going to start by looking at some questions we've had around the London Road level crossing in Bicester. Just a quick reminder of what we're consulting on with regards to that level crossing. In the consultation, we've considered 6 options or 6 concepts as they're described there. These are for a variety of replacements for the level crossing. In each of these proposals, the level crossing would be closed. And in concept 1, we would provide an accessible bridge for non-motorised users. So in other words, a bridge for pedestrians or cyclists and the like to cross the railway, but not road vehicles. In concept 2, a road underpass would be provided on the same alignment as the current London Road to allow both vehicles and pedestrians to pass under the railway. Concept 3 would be similar to concept 2, except instead of going under the railway, we would go over the railway. Then concepts 4 and 5 are a bridge either passing under or passing over the railway, just a short distance to the west of the current London Road level crossing. And then finally, concept 6 looks at some potential alternative locations around Bicester where it might be possible to provide alternative road crossings. So here we have some of the questions that we've had. As John's already said, what we've tried to do is we've tried to pick out some questions that are representative of some of the more general themes of question that have come in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out each of the questions as they appear on the screen and then provide an answer to that question. So the first one in respect of London Road is, why does this crossing need to be closed? Could you provide a bit more detail on the number of trains using the crossing today and in the future? So to deal with the first part of that question, why does the crossing need to be closed? There are a number of reasons why it's desirable to close London Road level crossing. As John's already explained, with the increase in the number of trains using the railway, the amount of time that the level crossing would be closed for would increase. We know that already there have been complaints about the amount of time that the level crossing barriers are down for, and that time is going to increase. The amount of minutes each hour that the barriers are down for is going to go up as East West Rail services are introduced. In addition to that, there are also the safety aspects related to level crossings. Although the UK does have one of the best safety records for level crossings in the world, unfortunately there still are a significant number of incidents and accidents at level crossings each year. And in particular, a number of these incidents involve members of the public who are just crossing the railway trying to get from one side to the other. So that's the reason why we're looking to close the level crossing and provide a replacement. So to answer the second part of the question about the number of trains using the level crossing, currently there are 2 trains an hour in each direction. These are the trains that run between Oxford and London Marylebone. Once the East West Rail line through to Milton Keynes is finished, that will go up by a further 2 trains per hour, making a total of 4 trains per hour in each direction. And then when the line through to Bedford and on to Cambridge is completed, that number will rise again and take the total up to 6 trains per hour in each direction. In addition to that, there are some freight trains as well that use the level crossing, and that number will need to be added, of course, to the 6 passenger trains each hour that are going over London Road. Moving on to the next question. Won't closing London Road to vehicles and forcing all traffic around the town via the A41 cut the town in half and make it more difficult to access the town centre from the south? Well, certainly our aim is not to cut the town in half, and for that reason we've put forward the six concepts for what we could do to link the 2 halves of the town, or 2 parts of the town across London Road level crossing once the crossing is gone. The first option that doesn't provide vehicular access at London Road does indeed divert traffic around the edge of the town via the A41. But we are looking at what impact that additional traffic would have and what difference that would make to journey times by car for people entering Vista from the south. At the next stage of design, we'll be doing some more detailed traffic modelling, and we'll be working with the local highway authority in undertaking that work. Moving on to the next one. Can more concepts be added to the London Road level crossing, such as a pedestrian underpass? We've already received a reasonable amount of feedback from people requesting that we look at a pedestrian underpass at the level crossing, and that was an option that wasn't included in our consultation. However, in light of the feedback and the strength of feeling around that, we have agreed that we will take that away and look at that as an additional option. And indeed, with all the aspects of our consultation, the aim of the consultation is really to flush out the feelings and the ideas about what we've put forward. So if there are things that we've missed, or things that you don't think we've got right, or things that could be better about any of the options we put forward, whether it's at London Road or anywhere else on the project, please do use the consultation as your opportunity to let us know about that. There is still plenty of time in this for us to take on board these comments and potentially amend what we're doing. We're actually consulting at quite an early stage in this project. It's relatively unusual for big infrastructure projects to consult at such an early stage, but we've chosen to do that because we realise that at this stage in the project, there is the greatest chance of us being able to take into account the feedback that we have from events such as this, and use that feedback to shape the project going forward. And finally, on the subject of London Road, have local residents and businesses been consulted, and how will they be compensated? So I'm going to answer the first part of that question. Have businesses and local residents been consulted? Well, this is the consultation. That's the purpose of this consultation now, to put forward our ideas and let people give us their feedback. For the point about compensation, I'm going to draw in my colleague Jörn from our land and property team to answer that one. Jörn, can you give us an answer for that, please?
Yep, certainly, Stephen. Thanks for that. So good evening, everyone. My name's Jörn Pace. I'm a land property manager for East West Rail. So to kind of follow on from what Stephen was saying, I mean, firstly, our priority is to avoid any negative impacts to the surrounding community. and my colleagues will touch on the steps we'll be taking during construction and our approach to the surrounding environment in order to mitigate these impacts. But onto kind of the support for landowners. At the moment, we're consulting on the need to sell scheme, which is a discretionary purchase scheme. And this is for those who are going through hardship and have a pressing need to sell, but who are unable to as a result of our proposals. So in effect, you could apply for your property to be purchased at its unaffected market value. And I will go into further detail on the need to sell scheme later in the webinar. But ultimately, we want your feedback on it and whether you think it's right support for those potentially affected. And then, in addition to later down the project timeline, that there are statutory provisions available for landowners and business owners, and that's for those both adjacent to the railway and within the line of the railway and its associated infrastructure. So we will be able to provide more information on the land requirements by the next round of consultation. And I hope that provides some information in response to the question. But if you've kind of got any more detailed questions, then please do get in touch. We've got live chat events where you can talk with an expert. So I think I'll now pass back to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Jörn. Okay, we're going to move on to the next set of questions. And these questions are around the stations on the route and the station experience. So the first question is, have you decided on the layout for the upgraded stations, and how will you decide? The answer to that one is no, we haven't at this stage. We're still looking at what's required at each of the stations. As for how we will decide, we'll take a number of things into account. In particular, we'll be looking at how the station is going to be used in future and how many people will be using them at any one time. One of the key things we want to do is make sure that the facilities that are available at each station are of the right size. So, for example, are there adequately sized waiting areas? Are there the right sorts of, for example, coffee shop or toilets or other facilities that people want to use? And also, we'll be taking into account the feedback we get from the current consultation. So again, we really would encourage you to give us any feedback you may have about what you would expect or like to see from your experience at a station. What sort of facilities would you like to be able to access at a station? And that will also help shape what we do at each of the stations we're looking at. On to the next question. Will we get to see detailed designs for planned upgrades to Oxford, Oxford Parkway and Bicester Village stations? Will we be consulted on these? So to answer that one, yes, you definitely will. This is a non-statutory consultation at quite an early stage in our design process. In addition to this consultation, there will be a further round of consultation a bit further on in the design process once we've firmed up our proposals a bit more. And at that consultation, we'll be presenting much more detail on exactly what it is we propose to do at each of the locations along the route. And at that consultation, of course, you will have the opportunity to provide further feedback before we make our formal application for consent to construct the railway and carry out the works we need to carry out. Right, I think that's everything that I'm going to be covering tonight. So I'm going to pass you back to Maria, who's going to talk to you about plans for freight.
Thanks, Stephen. And as Stephen said, I'm going to cover freight. It's a question that has come up a number of times, not just in relation to the Oxford and Bicester area, but across the route. And so my plan is to give you a little bit more clarity this evening around our plans for freight. So I just wanted to start by talking about some of the benefits that freight brings. So those range from environmental benefits, from modal shift by taking lorries off of the roads, easing congestion and providing a more effective way to move goods around the UK by rail. There are safety implications as well, and overall benefits to the UK economy from rail freight. But one of the things that we're keen to do is to balance the views and the needs of the local communities, because we know that there are potential negative impacts from freight operation in terms of emissions and noise, and we want to provide a balanced view and a balanced strategy to freight for this railway, which is why we're asking for your views as part of this non-stat consultation. So we have a mandate from government to continue to provide existing freight on the parts of our network that exist today. So that does include the Oxford to Vista part of the route. Also between Bletchley and Bedford, there are freight paths and freight trains that run today, and in the Cambridge area. So with our connection stage 1, which is the introduction of our services between Oxford and Milton Keynes, that is being delivered by Network Rail and will be in operation in a few years' time. There is going to be some additional freight which has already been consulted on. So by the time we get to our connection stage 1, there's around 49 freight paths provided. But one of the things that we need to understand once we've built our passenger timetable for our full Oxford to Cambridge route is what freight could also be accommodated in addition to those paths. So we need to ensure that we provide a regular clock face departure, and passenger services are our mandate from government. We're here to deliver a passenger railway that improves public connectivity. And we're in discussions with Network Rail and the freight operating companies to see what potential future demand there could be for freight on this railway. But the railway that we will be building will be enabled for freight operation. So a couple of questions that we've had on freight. How much freight traffic will there be, trains per day? So there's a difference between freight paths and freight demand. So even if the paths are provided, of which there will be up to 49, it's not necessarily 49 trains. It's very dependent on the demand from the freight operating companies and changes on a daily and weekly and monthly basis, dependent on the goods that they're moving around the country. So when we get that to our statutory consultation, we will be able to provide a lot more detail for you, and the strategy and our timetable work will be much more mature. The second question was around, will freight trains be running 24 hours a day? So that is not part of our plan. In our customer experience and railway ops part of the document, I think it's on page 33, we outline our proposed hours of operation, which doesn't include operation through the night. And so the answer to that question at the moment is no, freight trains will not be running 24 hours a day. So I hope that's helped to give some clarity, and I will now be handing over to Tristan to talk you through some of our environment questions.
Thanks, Maria. Good evening to everyone. My name is Tristan. I'm one of the Environment and Sustainability Managers at East West Rail. So like my colleagues, I've got a couple of specific questions I'm going to run through and provide some answers. Before I do that, I'm going to run through a couple of examples of our approach to the environment and what that means for this section in particular. Just before I start though, I always like to point out that environment is really at the core of everything we're trying to do at East West Rail. We want to deliver a genuinely sustainable form of transport for the ARC. And to do that, we've created something called our Environmental Sustainability Policy. It's a document that you can find on our website, and it covers 9 key principles in relation to the environment. So things like cultural heritage, landscape and visual, carbon, biodiversity, and it sets out our aspirations and our targets in relation to each of those. And it's that document and those principles that we're using to really shape the scheme and really shape the design of it, and make sure that we meet those and we deliver a genuinely positive railway. So coming onto this slide, the first point I'm just going to pick up on is around carbon. Now, clearly the climate emergency is really important at the moment, and that's why we're aiming to be a net zero carbon railway. Now, we are very early in the project. There's a lot of thinking left to do and a lot of work to do on what our long-term rolling stock is going to look like. But that means that we have to make sure that we develop our net zero carbon plans in line with existing and developing net zero carbon policy. And we make sure we think and we're cognizant of that commitment to remove diesel-only passenger trains from the rail line by 2040. So as I say, we're still very much in the early days of the project. We've got a lot of work to do to develop those targets and that trajectory. But this is information that we'd look to bring forward and consult on for our statutory consultation. So there'll be plenty more detail in time. So moving on to the next point there is around biodiversity net gain. Hopefully you're aware that for connection stage 1, the Network Rail Alliance has committed to a 10% target for biodiversity net gain. Whilst we haven't yet specified our specific targets, we are committed to achieving biodiversity net gain for the project. That's a really core and important part of what we're going to do at East West Rail, and it will mean that we leave the environment in as good a shape, if not better, than what we found it. Now, if we could pop on to the next slide, please. So I was just going to pick up on this first point here around sustainable energy for trains. And of course, we haven't yet made a commitment around electrification of the railway. And as I say, it's very much kind of caught up in that conversation around carbon and making sure that we are a carbon net zero railway. So as I say, there's a lot more thinking to be done and a lot more discussion to be had around what our long-term rolling stock looks like. And that's obviously where we want to hear the views of our community as well, and what people think about the potential for those different plans. And as I said earlier around net zero carbon, we'll obviously be coming and presenting this information at our statutory consultation for further consultation. Now, finally, coming on to the point at the bottom of the page around the community, we recognise that there's going to be concerns around the increased use of the railway and construction works. And that it's very important for us to make sure that we get our plans right so that we can minimise and reduce any impacts on the community as far as it's possible, and mitigate those where we have to. And what that means is that, sorry, just gonna finish that. What that means for us is that we will think very hard about the way that we build, the way that we undertake construction works. We'll have something called a code of construction practice, which will set out requirements on our contractors to make sure that they minimise and reduce the impact of their works as far as possible. And we'll think about communities and think about sensitive sites as much as we can during the development of the scheme, and make sure we properly assess those so we can develop appropriate mitigation plans. And again, this is the purpose of consultation. We want to hear from the communities about what they think is really important for them, any sensitive areas that we should know about, so we can make sure we take account of these and we consider these as we develop the scheme. Pop on to the next slide. So there's a couple of quite specific questions here that I'm going to provide some answers to. The first one is picking up on our rolling stock and whether it will be electric or diesel, and around that commitment to removing diesel trains by 2040. So this is clearly a really important issue for the communities and for East West Rail. And what I can say at the moment is, although we have not yet made a commitment, or the government has not yet made a commitment to electrify the railway between Oxford and Cambridge, we will need to ensure that the railway aligns with relevant policy and complies with relevant legislation related to net zero carbon, as I mentioned earlier, and noise protection, importantly. In 2018, the government challenged the rail industry to produce a vision for the removal of all diesel-only trains from the network by 2040. And we are absolutely committed to running a sustainable railway in the long term, with reduced emissions, including around carbon, nitrogen oxides and particulates. To that end, we are exploring how we can introduce new and emerging technologies in our long-term train fleet. And we will be seeking input from bidders across the market to ensure they properly understand our environmental goals. As I said earlier, there's clearly a lot of work to do in this area, but it's an area that we will look to bring a lot more detail and a lot more information forward during our statutory consultation. So the second question is about how we will reduce the impact of noise. So as I kind of picked up on the slide before, noise is one of noise and the impact on communities is going to be a really critical thing for us. And we recognise that noise will be a really big concern for those communities who are closest to the railway. We're committed to considering measures that will reduce noise and vibration for those communities. And this is going to include things like thinking about the choice of trains that we make. We appreciate that some trains are noisier than others, so we'll consider this as we make that decision about our rolling stock. We'll also think about the track technology and how that interacts with noise levels, and we'll think about where noise barriers may be appropriate. Now, we're going to carry out very detailed assessments of noise during the development of the scheme. This will use industry-leading computer modelling. It can incorporate information on local topography, including building heights, and tree cover and things like that. And this will simulate potential noise and vibration impacts along the whole route. It will help us understand exactly where mitigation is required, and what kind of mitigation is going to be required. It's also important to note that we'll be following best practice set by other schemes. There's lots of projects in this space who have come before us and done good things in this regard. And we'll also make sure that we follow the government's policy on noise. This has a number of aims, but most importantly, it's about avoidance of significant impacts on health and quality of life. Now, the noise assessment and the detail that sits behind that is something that we'll present down the line. So during our statutory consultation, we'll bring forward a document called the Preliminary Environmental Information Report, which, aside from a mouthful, will be a very large document, which covers what we think the scheme is going to look like, what we're proposing, what we think the scheme will look like, what we think the impacts of the scheme are likely to be, and what we're proposing in terms of mitigation to try and avoid those impacts. That will then be followed when we come to submit our development consent order with something called an environmental statement. Again, this will include a whole raft of detail about the scheme, what the design looks like, and the potential environmental impacts arising as a result, and how we propose to mitigate those. As I said earlier, I think this is an opportunity again for people to raise questions and raise concerns where they may have them, and make sure that we're aware of anything that we need to be aware of in terms of sensitive receptors or sensitive sites, to make sure that we capture those as we develop the scheme and we properly understand how to mitigate the impacts. So at this point, I'll wrap up and I'll hand over to Jan.
Thank you, Tristan. So I'd like to provide some further information that's relevant for landowners. I think we're still on one of the environment slides. There we go, thank you. So one of the key roles of the land and property team is to consult with landowners whose land could be potentially required by the scheme, and to keep them updated on the process. And with the proposals and concepts we're consulting on, there is likely to be land requirements outside the existing bounds of the railway. And as part of our development consent order application, which is our means of gaining permission for the project, we will be seeking powers for compulsory purchase. We would always look to enter into voluntary agreement with the landowners first, and compulsory purchase would be our last resort. And just to provide a bit more information on the timescales of this, our development consent order application is likely to be sometime between 2022 and 2024, and then there'll be a review period after that. So at this stage, we don't know for certain the land and property which will be needed, and our proposals for this area are at a very early stage, and we will be able to provide more information by the next round of consultation. We really do want to work with our stakeholders and our neighbouring landowners, so we can keep you updated and informed throughout the process. So I touched on the need to sell scheme earlier, and I just want to provide a bit more detail on that now. So on projects such as these, at the point of a development consent order submission, those landowners whose properties within the line of the railway route who are unable to sell them except at a reduced rate are affected by what's known as statutory blight, and they would be able to submit a statutory blight notice asking us to buy their property. But we recognise that that's much later in the programme, which is why we're consulting on the discretionary purchase scheme, the need to sell scheme. And if introduced, it would provide support to those who have a pressing need to sell, but are unable to as a result of our proposals. So if introduced, it would be at the preferred route or option selection point. So by our next round of consultation, which is likely to be winter 2021 or 2022. The other key difference between the need to sell scheme and statutory blight is that the need to sell scheme wouldn't be limited to the land within the line of the railway. I mean, we're looking for feedback on what people think about it. Is it the right mitigation? And if not, what sort of support would you expect to see? We've got a land and property focused section on our website, and there you'll find guides and leaflets on the need to sell scheme, blight, compulsory purchase and compensation. You'll also find the feedback forms, which we're encouraging people to return back, and details on how to get into contact with us. As mentioned earlier, we've kind of got experts who can chat to you during one of our live chat events, or you can get in contact through one of our email addresses, and we'll answer any questions you have. So I'll now pass on to Claire, who I think will discuss the consultation and kickstart the Q&A session.
Thanks very much, Jan. Absolutely. Before I wrap up, we've got some questions coming in, which is excellent. So thank you very much for those. And so I'm going to hand over to Hannah, who's going to go through the Q&A. Thank you very much, Hannah. Over to you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to everyone who has been sending in questions for us to cover. I'm going to start with some questions that have come in about the concepts, and I wonder if, Stephen, you'll be able to pick these up. The first question is, Oxfordshire County Council were considering another option not listed by you in the timeframe 2014 to 2016. This option was a road bridge that ran via the station car park and avoided many of the issues associated with R6 options. Why has this option not been considered?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll attempt to answer that one. The options we have really are picking up where others left off. The work that has been done by others hasn't been wasted, and we have copies of all the work that was previously done by other organisations. Those organisations include Oxfordshire County Council, as has been mentioned here, and also Network Rail. And we have looked at all of that work. Essentially, if I've understood correctly, which option or which version of a bridge we're talking about here, I believe this is actually a variation on a theme on our Concept 5 that we've presented. Our Concept 5 has a bridge to the west of London Road level crossing, which would partially at least pass through the station car park. The original version of this, or an earlier version of this that was looked at by Oxfordshire County Council, did place the bridge slightly further to the west than we're currently considering. At the time that option was developed, the Bicester village station hadn't yet been built, and I believe the current station building at Bicester village lies on the path of that bridge. That said, this isn't the first time this has been raised during these sessions, so we will go away and have a closer look at that, and we'll take a view as to whether we think we should be revisiting that one, possibly as I say, as a variation on Concept 5 that we put forward in this consultation. I'm hoping that answers that question.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm just going to keep you there for this follow-up question on the London Road level crossing options. Who will cover the costs of these options?
Okay, so the East West Rail project obviously is increasing the number of trains that we're going to pass over the level crossing, and the East West Rail project is picking up the cost of works up and down the railway, all the way from Oxford right the way through to Cambridge, that are associated with the increase in train service and the increase in passengers using the railway. As things currently stand, we would expect the project will be paying for the works to replace the London Road level crossing. It's quite possible that other local stakeholders may wish to contribute to the work we're doing. There may be other enhancements that can be carried out at the same time, or possible improvements which wouldn't strictly be part of the railway scheme. And if that were the case, then others may contribute funds to some of the works as well. But the core cost of paying for the bridge or underpass or whatever else it was that happened to replace the level crossing, that would be funded as part of the East West Rail project.
Thanks very much, Stephen. The next question I want to come on to is regarding future operations, and I'm hoping, Maria, you'll be able to answer this one. The question is, what frequency of trains do you envisage the electric spine project to generate?
Thanks, Hannah. So for those who aren't aware, the electric spine was a Network Rail scheme, a project to electrify a large part of the network in this area, in the Oxford area, which did include the Great Western Main Line and the East West Rail line. The vast majority of that work was de-scoped by Network Rail, including the East West Rail part of the plan. Our part of the electrification was de-scoped in August 2017 by the Secretary of State. So where are we now with electrification? Well, a firm decision hasn't been made on electrification of our line. and Tristan mentioned our potential options for the long-term fleet. But the frequency of trains that we expect to see, we don't anticipate any change should there be electrification of our line. So we're opening our railway in stages. So connection stage 1 will see 2 trains per hour between Oxford and Milton Keynes in both directions. Our connection stage 2 will see 2 trains per hour introduced between Oxford and Bedford. And then connection stage 3, those services are extended through. So we'll have 2 trains per hour Oxford to Milton Keynes, 2 trains per hour Oxford to Cambridge, and 2 trains per hour Bletchley to Cambridge. So those are our planned service introductions. And should there be electrification, and we still aim to run the same number of trains from an East West Rail perspective, I can't comment on other operators and their plans if there was to be electrification in the Oxford area. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. The next question is, I think, a land question, and I'm going to come to John on this one. The question is, what about the increase in land values alongside the railway as a result of its completion? Are you going to try and capture some of this increase?
Okay, thanks, Hannah. So it's not a straightforward or easy answer to that question. There are obviously most of the East West Rail service between Oxford and Bedford is a current railway, and equally from towards Cambridge there's a current railway section as well. So there's a very limited amount of new railway. But in respect of land capture, it is something that we've looked at or been looking at. It's been used on projects like Crossrail in London. I do believe that you do need specific types of powers to raise capital from those type of sort of taxes to pay for the future use and provision of infrastructure. But we have looked at it and we'll continue to keep any options open as part of our development of the business case, which we do have to do in order to have a business case developed in time for the DCO application in the future. So it's not something I can absolutely give you an answer on, but I know it is something that we've considered previously, and we continue to work on all options to be able to develop the business case for the railway in the future.
Thank you very much, John. And just for anybody who isn't aware, DCO is Development Consent Order. At this point, that's all the questions we've got in today. If you have got any questions that you think of after this webinar, please do join one of our 9 remaining live chat sessions where you can ask your specific questions to a member of the project team. And at this point, I'm going to hand back to Claire, who will just go through how you can get involved.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And yes, thank you very much for those questions. So there are lots of different ways you can get involved in this consultation, and it's really, really important that we hear from you. If you haven't already done so, please go to our virtual consultation rooms. You'll find them on the website. They are open until the 9th of June, and they've got lots and lots of information which will help to inform your decision making about how you wish to respond to the consultation. We've already mentioned our live chat events, and some of you may already have attended. So these are really useful sessions. They are 2 hour long. You've got 9 left, between 2 and 3 per week until the end of the consultation, which is on the 9th of June. And basically our team of experts are lined up to speak to you through the computer and through the live chat function. So you'll have a dialogue. So please really urge you to come along. If you've got any more questions, come along to one of our live chat events, and they are all advertised on the website. Also, if you go to the live chat function in the virtual consultation room and there's not actually an event taking place, please feel free to put in your question and we will get back to you. We are very aware that not everybody is online and not everybody is comfortable operating in a digital environment. So we have a dedicated team at the end of our telephone line. So if you know someone in that space, a neighbour or a member of the community, please do take a note of our telephone number, give it to that person and ask them to take part, ask them to give us a ring. Thank you. We have our feedback form, which we encourage you to use online. And of course, like I said, our consultation finishes on the 9th of June. Next slide, please. So we can't emphasize how important it is that we need to hear from you. And we thank you very much for coming along to this webinar this evening to find out more about the project in your area. And we're obviously very sorry that we can't see you face to face at the moment, but we hope this webinar has been useful to you. And it's recorded, as I said, so if you'd like to listen to it again, please go to our website. They are uploaded to the website within about 3 days. Obviously, it's 3 working days of the actual event, and also we upload them to our YouTube channel as well. So you can actually obtain a paper copy of all our documents and our feedback form. Email us at consultation@eastwestrail.co.uk for a copy of the feedback form, and you can send it to us. Sorry, apologies. To get a copy of the feedback form, please email us at contact@eastwestrail.co.uk, but you can actually send your consultation response to us at consultation@eastwestrail.co.uk. My apologies. Or you can send it to us by post at Free Post East West Rail. If you'd like to, next slide, please. So what's next? So basically, please do stay in touch. We are very eager to hear from you. We'll be pleased to answer your questions. We really want to hear your comments, understand what you feel, to get your feedback from how the project will affect you in your area. Any of your suggestions, please do put them on the feedback form and get back to us by the 9th of June. That's when the consultation ends. We have we're slightly early this evening. I think it must be Friday evening, and everybody wants to crack open a bottle of wine. So we are actually finishing slightly early today, but we have been through all the slides, answered all your questions. Just want to say thank you very much again for being with us this evening. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to hearing your having your consultation response. And I'd like to say goodbye and good evening from myself and the rest of the team. Good evening to you all, and thank you.